I'm sitting at breakfast this morning with one of my lifelong friends, Todd Shapiro, who not only did I go to law school with at the University of Texas, but made a great travel companion throughout Europe and into Greece. And we were talking about this shooting down in Houston, Texas. Todd Shapiro of the Shapiro Law Firm in Collin County, Texas, does work in Collin County and Dallas County and throughout Texas, who has represented some very high-profile criminal defendants throughout his career. Had some opinions as a bunch of guys were sitting around breakfast talking about this shooting in Southwest Houston. Todd, good morning. I'm glad to continue our conversation here today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
All right, man. So 46-year-old gentleman sitting in the Ranchito Taqueria number 4 in Houston is having a meal with his friend and several other people in this establishment when a masked man brandishing a handgun comes walking through the restaurant, robbing every single individual and the taqueria itself. He takes several laps around the patrons, and on his fateful last lap, this 46-year-old man pulls his own handgun and unloads 9 rounds into the quote-unquote bad guy's body, into his back while he's on the ground, 1 or 2 final shots to kill our purported bad guy. He's being hailed as a hero, our purported good guy, Todd. But there is some question as law enforcement asked him to come in for questioning about whether or not our, again, purported good guy could be charged with a crime. When you saw the video, what were your thoughts about whether or not there was any potential for the good guy to face consequences?
Well, my instant reaction was absolutely not. There are no consequences. My first reaction is we need more of what we saw in that video. As a Texan, as a gun proponent, as a father, as a husband, as someone that is getting sick and tired of seeing people like the bad guy night after night, week after week on the news and talked about in shows like yours. We need more people like the Good Samaritan that said, not today, not in this restaurant, not on my watch. And he took matters into his own hands before this guy killed the entire restaurant. And I do believe legally, at least here in the state of Texas, our Good Samaritan was absolutely within his rights of self-defense, defense of others or third parties, and defense of property, in absolutely shooting him in the manner in which he shot him and killing him dead on the spot. And the way he shot him and how many times he shot him was absolutely legal to use lethal force in that situation.
All right, I want to go into some of those various legal details in just one moment, but I kind of want to follow up on, look, to be real, your punditry at the top, but what your opinion is on whether or not we should or should not see more of this in society. And for the record, I totally agree. You know, as you and I were sitting around with our friends talking about this morning, everyone said, this is the only way this stops. The only way that we stop seeing things like this happen is to have citizens stand up for themselves so that criminals will feel a repercussion beyond the potential for arrest and incarceration. But I'm curious about that from not just your opinion as one of my friends, but as somebody who works within the criminal justice system, you know, often on the side of the defendant. Is jail just not enough of a threat or the potential for prosecution, Todd? I mean, is it that my life could be in danger should I choose to break the law?
Well, I think this case study or this situation brings up an excellent example of how maybe prison is not the deterrent we might think it is. It is a terrible place. And I say that from firsthand knowledge, from people that have been there and people that get out, and the stories you hear. The things that the general public hears about prison are absolutely true. It is an awful, awful place to be in. But this individual that we're talking about that is now deceased and is now dead by his own actions, he spent time in the penitentiary. Right. He went to prison for some actions exactly that he was taking just the other night that got him killed. So when he robbed a store 15, 20 years ago and shot and killed a clerk during an armed robbery and received a 15-year sentence in the penitentiary, which was very light, by the way, and ended up getting out 5 years later, that didn't have any effect on his life. That didn't have any deterrence on his future behavior or stop him from committing the same kind of crime again, not many years later. So this situation is a perfect case study. And in how it did not work for this person. Sometimes individuals are so depraved, have such a depraved mind and such a depraved heart, there's no way to stop them, unfortunately. And we saw this play out right here in Houston, Texas on the night in question. And now, yes, we found out that the gun the guy had maybe wasn't an operational weapon, right? It could not have fired. But those people in that restaurant did not know that. The man that shot him dead did not know that. And it had the desired effect when the guy was waving it around. They didn't know.
Yeah. One more on this before, again, we go into the nature of the gun and the number of shots and some of the details that people think could impact the legal potential for consequences for our good guy. Before that, though, you and I went to law school together. And for those that don't know this, like, had I pursued a path as an attorney, I would have gone down the same path as you. I would have probably looked to be a prosecutor and at some point been involved in criminal defense. And it's not necessarily because I believe the justice system is unjust. It's because I want to be in trial and because I believe that as an American right, everyone deserves a vigorous defense in front of the government. But you have this wonderful perspective, man, having pursued this career, and that is many of us that talk politics think the reason criminals don't fear prosecution is because of weak prosecutors that don't go after them. But you're talking about even those that go to jail. And there is no doubt this guy, first of all, sentenced to 15 years on a previous murder, and then I don't think, Todd, in my reading, that he even served the entire 15. What is it? Is it, like you said, they're so deprived, the only thing that works for them is self-preservation, meaning I'm afraid somebody's going to shoot me? Or why are they not afraid of the criminal justice system?
It just seems like for someone like him, it's a revolving door. And no matter how bad the crime is, the sentence is never really going to fit what we society think a crime like that should receive. You hear people say all the time, they only got that for that. Someone maims someone, kills someone, hurts someone, and they end up serving that little amount of time, and then they're right back out on the streets, and they're right back out committing the same kind of foolish acts against society, and they're doing things to innocent bystanders, and it just continues over and over and over and over again because that individual simply has not learned their lesson, or they don't know any other way of life. They just simply don't have the skills necessary to do anything else. So an individual like this, he had no other choice but to go in there and try to take other people's money because he has no other way to get any other money. All he can do is go rob and steal and do the things he did. But he has no respect for human life, and he doesn't care what happens to him because in his mind, if I get caught, I'll go do another 5. I'll go do another 7. I'll go do 10, and then I'll get out and I'll be out again. That's my opinion.
So I want to ask you this one more before we get into the details of this case, because I think it's in everybody's mind. I would ask you this if we were sitting around breakfast, and I think anybody listening goes, wow, but what about you, Todd? You are a criminal defense attorney. Do you not help contribute to the light sentences these guys get? So, as I said, my personal opinion and belief in the American justice system is everyone deserves a vigorous defense in front of the government. But so how do you reconcile your role in the criminal justice system with your belief that a lot of these guys are getting off way too easy?
Well, I don't know if it's I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying. I don't know if they're getting off way too easy, but that's the way that our system is structured, right? Everybody plays a role. Everybody has a job to do. And if I was representing an individual like this, and of course, during his previous stint where he got sentenced to 15 years for the aggravated robbery that he committed when he was a much younger man, I'm sure his lawyer fought very hard to get him the very best sentence he could because he was a younger man. And I'm sure he showed contrition at the time and remorse and said and did all the right things without knowing that here's where he was going to be 10 to 12 years down the road, right back in the same position, because no one can predict with certainty where someone is going to end up down the road. And you would hope that an individual like this would learn from his prior mistakes, and anybody is going to become a better person with maturity and perspective, but it doesn't always happen that way. And this is the worst case scenario played out right in front of our eyes, where we have a multiple time offender continuing to do the same exact things. So, yeah, I mean, no, you're asking me as this guy's lawyer, if I was in his in his side, on his side, in his case all these years ago, would I have stood up and said, we can't only give him 15 years, he needs to do more? Well, of course not. That's not my job. That's a judge's job, a jury's job, or a prosecutor's job to push for more time, to say he deserves more. My job is to zealously represent my client and try to find reasons to mitigate his sentence as opposed to aggravate it.
And it should be noted, you are very good at your job. And by the way, I think this can come full circle to your opinion as we go into the details. Sometimes justice isn't found in the criminal justice system. And I think that your and my both opinion is we just found justice on the floor of this taqueria. Now, there are people that look at this and say way, way over the top when it comes to the good guy. I've read social media response. So I want to ask you about some of these, and you can tell me if you think this has any legal bearing whatsoever. So you started to bring up one. It turns out that the bad guy with the gun, a guy named Eric Eugene Washington, who turns out to be 30 years old, was carrying what they're calling a plastic gun. May have been airsoft, may have been BB, may have been a toy gun. Does that in any way affect a prosecutor, a grand jury's calculation of what went down inside the taqueria?
No, not at all, because the reality of the situation was at the time that he was committing the aggravated robbery, there is no legal requirement that the gun be a working weapon. It's more about the effect on the people inside the establishment, that they were in imminent fear of serious bodily injury or death in their own mind. Put yourself, a reasonable person, in their position that they believed that he was holding a real weapon. If the gun was like a Nerf gun, right? If he had come in with one of those, we all have kids, those that have kids, they've got those pop guns now that they're shooting darts and stuff. Well, everybody knows that's not a real gun. That's a completely different story, right? If it was a toy pop gun and you could tell it was, that's completely different. If the weapon looked like a real gun to the eye, and he was waving around like a real gun and saying, I'm going to kill everybody or get down on the ground and give me your money, and it played out that way, then the effect on the audience is what's important, not whether or not the weapon actually could fire.
Okay, second, he's taken a lap around the taqueria, several. And so on one of the laps, what I said would end up being his fateful last lap, he walks past our good guy, whose name has not been revealed and wants to remain anonymous. He walks past our good guy, who quickly draws his gun, it looks like out of his waistband, and then shoots the guy in the back. It ends up being, I think the number we've heard is 9. But and each of these details we'll deal with separately, Todd. But what about the fact that he shot him in the back? Is that pertinent?
Oh, I don't think so at all. If you, and I watched the video a number of times this morning at breakfast. We kind of watched it slowly. First of all, it's a very quick moving scene. It happens very quickly. And he doesn't know where the shots, first of all, how many of the shots connect. Number two, what kind of damage they're doing, which one of the shots is the fatal shot. He has a right to shoot to kill, number one, not a shoot to wound. The law is very clear on that. He can fatally fire. He doesn't have to shoot just to wound him. And so the number of shots to me is irrelevant. He gets to shoot until he knows that the individual is dead. And he has an absolute right to do so for the protection of himself and everybody else in the room.
Okay, that addresses the number of shots. What about the fact that it looked like all of the shots were into the guy's back, maybe his side? He wasn't facing the bad guy.
That's right. And it looked like to me when he began to fire, the guy still had the gun out to the side, and there was a patron sitting diagonal across the restaurant in his aim where the gun was pointed. So the idea that he was walking away from him doesn't mean that he wasn't going to make another loop around the restaurant or even fire at that person sitting. The threat was still imminent. It was still real, and it was still going on. It's not as if the individual was retreating out of the restaurant. He wasn't out on the sidewalk. He hadn't left the premises. He wasn't getting in a car. The threat was still imminent. I think any reasonable person would agree it's still a real threat.
Okay, so those are good details. So let me give you two hypotheticals. One, a bad guy is holding a gun to my head, Todd. You walk up behind him and shoot him in the back of the head, execution style. That's fine because he's a threat to me, right? There's no requirement that you Old West style or face-to-face with the bad guy.
No requirement. It's an imminent threat. Threat, serious bodily injury or death to be able to use deadly force.
What about now he is retreating, to your point? What if he has left the restaurant and he's walking away, but he's already been representing a threat to everybody? And you've said this a couple times, so I think it's worth underlining. In Texas law, it is also a threat to property as well, not just to bodily injury. So what if he is walking out the door of the restaurant and our good guy then shoots him in the back? Does that change the calculus?
Now we're starting to get a little bit more murky, right? It becomes more of a gray area as opposed to a clear line. You have a right to deadly force here. Once they retreat, once they're in the mode of retreat, especially if they've left the premises, now we're starting to get into an area where reasonable people could differ on whether or not it was still a threat or an imminent threat. And now you're starting to say, okay, grand jury may indict, jury may disagree, prosecutor may think that charges need to be brought, as opposed to a bright line of there's just simply no way that this individual was not justified in the use of deadly force.
Okay. All right. You've already addressed. He was a threat. We didn't know if he was going to make another lap around the restaurant. We didn't know if he was going to quickly wheel and turn. Doesn't matter the direction of the shots fired ultimately by our good guy. Doesn't matter the number, because there's no requirement to wing a guy or wound a guy. You shoot to kill. So there's no difference between 3 and 9 shots. So in the video, everyone can see when the bad guy is down on the ground, he's dropped his plastic toy gun, which no one knows is not a real gun at that moment. And our good guy walks up, picks up the gun. He now holds the gun. Bad guy's on the ground, and our good guy looks like he puts 1 or 2 more rounds, stands over the body, and puts 1 or 2 more rounds into the guy's head or chest. Does that, and people are pointing out on social media, those are way beyond the pale. Those were clearly something beyond just disarming this guy or neutralizing the threat. There was something more here. In your mind, does that change the calculation at all?
No, it still doesn't, because either one or two things is going on here. If the individual was now dead, then he's already dead. So it doesn't matter if you shot him. I mean, whether he's a threat or not, he's not a human being anymore if he's no longer alive.
Mutilation of a corpse. I mean, what's the potential charge for those shots?
And we don't really, I guess, I don't think there's any way to ever really know if the guy was still alive or not. I mean, it all happened so quickly. I mean, these shots all were fired from my eye within a couple second moment. And the adrenaline, the rush of adrenaline at the moment was probably greater than anything this man had ever experienced. Our Good Samaritan, our hero in my mind, that saved the lives of everybody potentially in that room. His actions and how he went about his business simply cannot be questioned. Of all the things that we've had to deal with as a society and as a community, with all these horrific acts and how we have to deal with them over the years, to question the manner in which this guy protected that restaurant, to me, is looking the wrong way. Did he shoot too many times? Did he shoot in a manner that wasn't prescribed? Should he have fired that last shot? Baloney. He saved everybody's life that was in there, and he should be commended and not criticized. In my opinion, from a legal standpoint, if the body was already dead, then A, it's not a crime. And then B, if the body was not yet dead, he had a right to continue till the body was, because it was still a threat if it wasn't. Who knows if the guy was just hit in the arm and he could have gotten up and continued to try to assault everybody. It was still an imminent threat if it wasn't dead, in my opinion, based upon what had been going on in the moments just before.
And you use this term several times. And again, to just underline or highlight something you've said, the standard in all of these scenarios I'm laying out for you and the audience as a hypothetical or in the exact details of this case is, what would a reasonable person do in a similar situation? Or what would a reasonable person, how would they see this man's action in this situation? And I think you're right. For everyone involved, most likely everyone listening, the standard is, you're all reasonable. What would you do? What would you criticize? How would you judge a man who acted as this man? And I think most would come away with it the same way you and I did this morning at breakfast. Not only does this man not deserve criticism or prosecution, he deserves a medal. I know this for anyone listening. If you're in trouble in Texas, not just North Texas, you want to call my friend Todd Shapiro, who, by the way, I think Todd will agree, two people could not be more different than Todd and me, at least on the surface in our daily rituals and habits and our choices, maybe late night and in the day throughout our 20s, but somehow made for great friends and great companions through Texas, through law school, through Europe, and through life, man. Thank you, buddy.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
The Shapiro Law Firm. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.